Brooke Sellas, a middle-named person like me. Great to have you on my show. In your own words, Brooke, how would you like to describe yourself?
Oh my gosh, from a personal standpoint or a professional standpoint?
Well, you tell me.
Professionally, I am an overachiever. Personally, I don't want to do anything. My perfect day personally is a rainy day laying on the couch binging something on Netflix, but that's not me professionally. I'm very different.
And how do you reconcile those two?
I tell myself that because I work so hard in my professional life that I probably should really enjoy in my personal life, you know?
Love it.
But I guess I also ride horses in my personal life. So you could say I've had a little bit of craziness in me. And that ties into the professional side because I'm an entrepreneur, right? So there has to be like a little streak of wildness in there somewhere.
I love that. I'm about to do an interview with my old roommate from university who wrote a book called Winning with Horses.
Ooh.
And so lots of horses will be in the future. So your book, Conversations That Connect, how to connect, converse, and convert through social media listening and social-led customer care. Tell us why you decided you want to write this book.
That's a great question. I've owned my business for a little over 11 years now. And when I first started out, I thought I was going to be building social media strategies and delivering those to the client and walking away, right? Kind of like a consultant. And with my very first client, I delivered the strategy. And about 2 weeks later, they called me up and they were like, Brooke, we can't implement this. We just don't have the time. We don't have the resources. We're scared. We don't know what to post. And I realized very quickly that it wasn't that my customers needed a strategy because they knew they need some help maybe with the strategy, but they really knew what they ultimately wanted and what they wanted to do and how they wanted to tie it to goals. What they didn't know how to do or didn't want to do was execute. And so I quickly pivoted to executing. And in that journey of executing social media management for people, the clients would start to come to me and say, we love the content you're putting out. We love, all of the stats and the engagement and the followers. But is there any way you could cover us more time and respond quicker to some of these requests that we get, like support, basically social media support? And I said, well, yeah, because we already do basic management, which is where we respond within the same day. So very quickly, I started to have clients ask about this thing that I didn't know what to call it, but ultimately it's social media customer service. And so we ended up rolling it out about 6 years ago after we beta tested it for a year with one of our clients. And lo and behold, it became our biggest revenue stream and the thing we're most known for.
Well, congratulations. I have a couple of thoughts that ruminate in my head as I listen to you. The first is a story about a chap running an enormous grocery store that's based out of France called Carrefour. And he had an Instagram account that he chose to sort of hide his identity behind because he didn't want to be known for this within the company. Okay. And his passion was a black and white photography with his Nikon camera. And the funny thing is he ended up with more likes, more followers of that personal account, the black and white photos that he was taking than the entire company Instagram account. Which leads me to the observation I have with my daughter, where I have, like my daughter, about the same number of followers, but anytime she posts something, she gets hundreds, if not thousands of likes, and I sputter to get 20, 30, 40, 50. And my observation, so the first one is about the personal element of it, as opposed to the corporate side of things. And the second one is the and I'm going to say younger, but also female side of it versus the masculine side of it. How do you riff on that?
I mean, I talk about this a lot in the book, but I think it's that we're emotional beings, right? Literally, we are built on our emotions and our feelings. We're thinking beings separately from that, right? I would say that's a secondary and probably even way further down the listing that we are, because some of us don't think at all. But knowing that we base 95% of our decisions on emotion and only 5% on logic and thinking, it's still appalling to me that corporations typically are posting content that is devoid of any emotion or feelings. And people obviously are posting personal things, even with black and white photography. I'm sure there was a story that was being told. It invoked some kind of feeling or emotion. And that inherently is what I want companies and corporations to realize and change with their social media marketing. If you want, the old adage of like, know, and trust, you can't get to know, and you certainly can't get to trust without being vulnerable. I mean, those are the basic tenets of any relationship, including a brand to a customer.
What's interesting about this like, know, and trust that you just said is my almost smirk at how people operate on LinkedIn. I don't know them, therefore I can't possibly trust them. And why would I like them? And why would they connect if you don't know, like, or trust them?
Well, because they're trying to sell you something. And this goes back to that branded content. It's steeped in, from the book, what we call cliches and facts, not in opinions and feelings. And you cannot get, I think the other point I guess I should probably point out is brands view connection as a subscriber or a sign up or a download or a customer who's going to come in and buy something. But that's not connection. Connection by definition is two-way, right? It can't be one way. So I think brands are getting that very first step of connection wrong. So how could they get beyond connection to knowing, which is, some of the conversations that you would have back and forth to understand your customer better, to conversion? You can't really get to conversion without connection and conversation. So you might have but you're not going to get to know and trust.
So if I ran a large brand called Redken when I was working at L'Oreal. And the idea that people want to connect with a brand is a struggle for me, because I think people want to connect with people.
Yes.
And the challenge with that in a corporation where you work for a brand for a while and then move on means that in the end of the day, you connected with a person who worked in a brand, but then who moved on. So you're left sort of strung out with the brand, not the person. And it becomes difficult to craft personal messages when the people who are typing the messages are rotating. And it feels like ultimately it's the strongest need to have, if that's your situation, an agency to deal with your communication as a brand, if you don't know how to create that sort of more personal, intimate touch and feeling as a brand through the people you are employing.
Yeah, I think you're hitting on a great point there. I mean, there's a couple of real mismatches between social care and the way corporations operate. There's high turnover, especially at a lot of these larger brands who do have the high volume of these conversations that would happen through social. They don't have the know-how, they don't have the skill set, they don't have the digital body language that's required a lot of times to handle things. And they typically work Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, when social lives 24/7, right? So that's a big mismatch. But I do think that's one of the things that our customers say they love about working with an agency. Ever since we've rolled out this program, by the way, we haven't had one customer care client churn. That's how valuable the service is. And I think, to your point, part of that reason is because they have a pod of people who are dedicated to their brand, who intimately know the brand's tone, voice, all of those things, and know how to take the brand's values, tone, and voice and turn that into personal connection, conversation type content. And they get a direct line to me. So I think they really appreciate that well, but that's why we want to stay boutique and we don't want to become a 1,000-person agency, because if we did, we would also have that high turnover. So we're very selective about who we work with, and we're very selective about the team members that work with us. So I think that's a big reason as to why it does work for some of these, larger brands.
And yet the issue remains, Brooke, of the solid understanding of that tone, sense of humor, borders or frontiers that shouldn't be crossed.
Yes.
Because, I mean, as soon as we're personal, you can go, ha, 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 giggle. and is that, whatever, or blurt something out because you're being spontaneous. And yet, if you're a pharmaceutical company, that you're laughing at my illness, or
Yeah.
whatever. The speed with which things can be taken poorly
Yes.
means that you write too many protocols to fit into. Well, how do you sneak my personality into it?
Yeah, that is probably the number one challenge. And I think we work with, some from pharma brands and some finance brands, where there's a ton of red tape. And what I love about these brands in particular, especially our clients who we work with, hi y'all,
Mm.
they are so innovative in how they think about these things. They understand that they need to talk about their mission and their values as a brand so that they can attract customers who have similar values. The example I gave in the book was Nike. Everybody thought they made a huge mistake with the Colin Kaepernick campaign. Everybody was saying, oh, people were burning their Nikes, right? In videos and saying they would never buy from Nike again, this, that, and the other. But Nike knew their audience, right? And what ended up happening is their stock price actually went up and they actually made more money. And I think that's one of the clues as to what you need to do if you want to get vulnerable and you want to try to go into this space with a personality as a brand, is you have to intimately understand who your audience is. Because to the outside person, that seemed risky. But to Nike, they knew who their buyer was, and people who loved them even more for that and bought more shoes. They made more money and their stock price went up.
What's interesting about your commentary about Nike is we're not talking about employee satisfaction, because ultimately, for me, this is about congruency within your culture. And great to have share price go up, sales to go up, clients who are buying the shoes happy. But in the end of the day, the individuals who are typing on the keyboard, who need to look in themselves in the mirror, that measurement of employee engagement is, I often feel, totally missing in the way people evaluate social media.
Yes, that is a huge piece of the social care pie, is EX or employee experience, because you can't be that kind of brand online, right? Where again, it's like digital body language. If you don't have the buy-in of your frontline workers and your employees, who are the ones who are out there really representing the brand, the brand people aren't even the ones who are on the front line. So I think, part of the pie is, yes, employee experience and making sure that you have the right people in the right roles, and also knowing your audience intimately so you can create that kind of content. And then I think a third one, which is another hard one for companies to do, is treat social media like a playground. That is your sandbox to test ideas and test concepts and ask questions that bring that voice of customer data back to the people who aren't on the front line in branding, and helps you make better customer focused decisions based on the information that you're grabbing from, basically the world's largest focus group that's free, which is social media.
I love it. I always like to cite a former CEO, a guy called Ronan Dunn, who's an Irishman. And he was CEO of a very large telephone company in the United Kingdom, and then in the United States, Verizon. And he used to, even though busy, big job, spend half an hour a day, he said, every morning listening to social media, because that got him in touch, got through the chain of communications directly, raw, into the customer. And I think a lot of CEOs, or a lot of C-suite anyway, are missing that.
Yeah.
So the
I love
challenge,
the word raw, by the way. That's like the perfect way to describe the data that we get from social. And I mean, it is raw. It's not pretty. But it can provide so much information. Anyhow, go ahead.
Yeah, no. So then how do you deal with bad social media, or aggressive trolley? Because there's a lot of that. And
yes.
and you see an individual with 2 followers, and you just cast that aside. They have 2 million followers, even though they're using expletives and unforgivable language. Do you have to deal with it? How do you evaluate those types of nasty, bad news type of social media?
Believe it or not, this is my favorite type of social media, because I think understanding negative sentiment as a brand is a superpower, right? Because every negative event is an opportunity to turn that customer or that person into a stark, raving, loyal fan if you handle it correctly. Now, when we're talking about trolls, there are people who come to social media literally just to troll, right? They're not a customer. They're never going to buy from you. They have 2 followers or 2,000 followers, whatever it is, but you can kind of tell that they're a troll. And a lot of social media experts will tell you block them, ban them, hide them, delete them. But what I would say from experience is we've had some of our brands have customers who became trolls. I'm talking about posting every day, nasty stuff, day after day after day after day after day. You can't block, ban, hide, delete a paying customer, especially for this luxury brand. So I think it's more about creating a troll policy and understanding what to say, how to say it, and then understanding when to disengage. So it's not necessarily, blocking someone or banning them or deleting those comments because, by the way, like 86% of consumers, especially the younger groups, look at brand conversation and weight it higher or equal to online reviews. So this is why it's so important to respond as the brand, even if it's negative. But back to the troll situation, you have to know when to disengage. And that should be part of your troll policy. At what point, if you're asking this person, hey, I'm so sorry you're having this experience, let's go to DM, I'll get your phone number or whatever it is, and we'll get this worked out. And they won't go there and they're still posting nasty grams, every day. Then at some point you do need to disengage, but every brand has a different policy on how and when that happens, or at least the brands we work with.
Yeah, they ought to have that policy. I don't know
They
if every
should.
brand does.
Yes.
Yeah, you mentioned at the top this notion of speed with which you respond, and for having worked in a large organization, I was seeing how back a long time ago, because it's now been 14 years since I left, but back in those days, we could see that there was more and more impatience and need to respond quickly. So we're talking about the early part of the century. And yet you need to have a more congruent system of communication within your organization in order to be able to feed that. The example I used to give all the time would be someone complains or says something, in this shampoo, it had this ingredient, I'm allergic to it. Can you confirm it exists? Something like that. So you receive that. You're the social care or social media, whoever it is that's receiving it. And you're like, well, I don't know. I'm just a marketing dude. So then I send that message to the labs. So someone who's taking care of shampoos, and I finally find that person. And that person says, sorry, who are you? I'm a marketing intern. I'm working for the summer and I've got this message. Well, I say, who are you? They don't even ask it. They look at it, they raise their eyebrows and say, I've got other things to do.
Right.
So your desire to get back to this client within 4 hours is ruptured because there isn't any sensitivity within the organization to what you are facing on the front line. And at times that might mean mobilizing a whole set of people that aren't necessarily correlated or reporting into you. So how do you face that? Or what advice do you have when you are talking with a customer about this idea of rapid response?
Yeah. So I have so many thoughts here because rapid response, unfortunately, customers are getting more and more impatient about response time, especially on digital channels. So on social media, the gold standard is with under an hour response time, but really a lot of reports show they want it in less than 30 minutes, which is bananas. So the first thing I would say, and this is one of the things we do with every single one of our customer care clients, is we create FAQ documentation and we triage conversations as they come in. So that first time somebody asks about an ingredient, we don't know, right? That would be labeled as a red. We couldn't solve it ourselves on the front line, and we would go through the proper channels to get that question answered. Once it's answered, we add that to the FAQ documentation. And the next time somebody asks about ingredients, we have an answer. So that's a green conversation, and it allows us to solve that problem right there on the front line at the first touch. So that's first contact resolution, which is a huge metric for us to measure, because what we find oftentimes is that we are able to resolve with the help of internal forces these questions right off the bat, right on social, which, decreases re-escalations, meaning people who come back and complain again because they haven't heard something. And re-escalations, by the way, cost your business tremendously. This is where a lot of customers will churn away from a brand if they have to re-escalate a problem or a complaint. And part of having that FAQ document and providing that information and constantly updating it involves buy-in from the top. So we have usually someone sitting in a very top spot, whether it's the C-suite or maybe a VP of comms or HR or whatever it may be, marketing. And that person has a line to the top. So we can pretty much go to almost the top with this, red situation, this ingredient question, and they can make sure that we get an answer as quickly as possible. And then once we have that answer, like I said, it goes into the documentation, which the team all has access to. And we just get faster and faster with being able to solve problems directly on social very quickly.
So you talk about it almost like the red hotline.
Yes,
allows you to bypass. Yeah, exactly. But I do think that this is typical of the type of problems that you might have on the front line. You want to have with intent, you're intentional, you're authentic, genuinely wanting to get back to them quickly. And if you write a message like, well, hey, listen, within 30 minutes, hi, listen, I saw your message about this ingredient, but we'll get back to you. And then you have to make a commitment. We'll get back to you within.
Yes.
But it's not within your power to dictate that, especially if you're an agency. So I see that as a troublesome, irksome area that requires maybe this red hotline, but also a strong integration within the organization so that people aren't saying, who's this Brooke person?
Oh, yeah. No, I'm with you. The financial client that I talked about, again, they're so innovative. I love using it as an example because the negative sentiment around financial brands on social is pretty ugly, right? They don't usually fare very well. But they have us plugged into their VP of comms, their VP of HR. We talk to everybody on their social. Well, it's called member social care for them because they have members. And everybody on their marketing team, everybody on their paid media team. We have our hands in so many different departments within the business to try to help be the middle, like a spoken wheel kind of model, so that they're not operating in silos. We help them become, that middle of the wheel so that we can all move forward together. And that's the ideal setup and situation. Not that everybody sees it that way or does it that way, but honestly, those are the brands that we see making win after win after win when they don't, operate in silos.
Brooke, I wanted to circle back on something you said earlier about the nasty people and your favorite thing. I wanted to give a little hat tip to my friend, Jay Baer, presumably and his book, Hug Your Haters.
Yes.
Would be something that Jay would subscribe to.
Yeah. He actually, his Time to Win report that came out recently, and now he's actually going to release a short book, he says, is amazing. If you're not sure how you're doing on timing as far as, and he goes beyond social, right? Our focus is social, but he talks about email, in person, all these different things. And he also hits heavily on re-escalations and how much they cost business, and looking at all of those areas and kind of gives some tips for becoming faster, not just on social, but email, in person, all of those things. So yeah, I love him. He always has amazing content and is such a fabulous researcher.
So I'll be sure to put that in the show notes. So this book is entitled Conversations That Connect, and conversations is a topic near and dear to my heart. It's the subject of my next book. Ooh. And so I've written 350,000 words, but I hope the book will be a little shorter.
It's a novel.
It's an encyclopedia almost. But conversations, obviously, there are many different types of conversations. But what type of conversation do you subscribe to that makes these emotional connections and builds community? How do you define? Is it topic, intensity, vulnerability? What is it that makes for conversations that connect?
Yeah, so I'm going to get nerdy here just for a second, but I have to give the backstory to answer your question. But essentially, I did my undergraduate thesis on the social penetration theory. Horrible name, brilliant concept. But essentially, back in the 1970s, there were these two social psychologists, and they came up with the way humans connect with one another? How do we build relationships? And what they said was it was basically based on the level of disclosures we give to one another. And those 4 levels of disclosures are cliches, does nothing to move the relationship forward. Facts, fine, but really isn't, again, moving the relationship forward. And then opinions and feelings are the 2 final and deepest layer of how we build trust and build relationships with people. And so my thesis looked at social media and said, hey, does this apply to social media and to brands and people? And what I found was yes, as long as brands were using opinion and feeling content, which, as you know, most brands are not. Most branded content, you can run out to social media right now and see exactly what I'm talking about, is cliche and fact. But the brands who share opinions and ask for opinions, who share feelings or values and ask for those feelings and values back, have the biggest audiences, have the most brand conversations happening on social. And I can't speak for every brand and only my clients, but have a lot more conversions that actually come from organic social media.
So I've written about machines having feelings, and that doesn't seem to be an acceptable thought yet. And of course, I would concur. Do brands have feelings?
I think they do. Well, good brands do. I think brands who get it and who understand that whole fact that we're emotional beings and that 95% of our decision making is based on emotions, know and start with, hey, this is our brand and these are our core values. Patagonia is a great example, right? They are an outdoor apparel brand. They care about the planet. And a lot of their content talks about their feelings and their opinions on climate change. And this aligns so well with the Patagonia customer because the Patagonia customer is an outdoorsy person. They love being in nature. Because they love being in nature, they probably respect nature and really care about the planet. So Patagonia is constantly aligning those feelings that they have as a brand about the planet with their consumers, and they meet in the middle, through purchase. But it's more than a purchase. I mean, if you go look at some of the customer stories for Patagonia, it's they align with that brand on a bigger way than just a purchase. They're not going there because of the price or because of the materials. It's because of the brand values.
So I've had the chance to speak to some folks there, and there are some competitors, and my sentiment is that, and I don't know if that's an opinion or a feeling, Brooke.
Opinion. Well, it could be both. We'll see.
My sentiment is that the Yvon Chouinard, who was the founder of Patagonia, is the reason why that's credible. There's a personalized or a personality that is a person that speaks as a public figure and represents those feelings. The vast majority of corporations hide behind subterfuge of, the CEO. I have more time. I don't have time to do this. I have to talk to my shareholders. I'm doing other things strategically. And the idea of expressing feelings and opinions, well, if you're not the founder, how do you know that these are the right feelings that you want to do? In other words, you start having filters that suggest the feelings you need to have as opposed to having the feelings that you should have.
It's funny that you asked this question because this is an ongoing conversation with many of our clients. And I'll give you a couple of examples. When we, a few years ago, we're going through all of the protests and Black Lives Matter. Several of our brands said they wanted to post in support of Black Lives Matter. And obviously, we wanted to support them in whatever their mission or value was. But for some of the brands, we knew that it was more of a gesture than an action. And we discouraged them from making those posts unless they could tie it to an action as the brand, right? We support Black Lives Matter and we're doing this thing or giving this donation or whatever it was, whatever that piece of action was, along with that support of Black Lives Matter. The ones who had action tied to their messaging did great. The ones who went against our advice and posted without action got a lot of backlash. So I think you have to understand as your brand, whether it's the CEO or the C-suite or whomever it is, you have to understand and know what your company values are. Is it, pride? Is it Black Lives Matter? What is it that you stand behind? Is it saving the planet? Is it, providing clean water? Whatever those core values are, it has to come from the top. You have to be steadfast in what it is, and then it needs to trickle down within the organization, which is hard. I know that's not easy, but I think we're going to see, especially as the younger groups come into more buying power, that the brands who don't adopt this kind of mentality of their brand having values and opinions and tying those values and opinions to their customers will have a very hard time.
And tying them to the behaviors, the actions as well.
Yes.
The challenge in these types of, I'm going to give you an example of, I remember reading in a book about how there was a big corporation that was doing very sort of so-so in social media. And then one day they hired an intern, and she was particularly funny and snarky and got lots and lots of likes and retweets. And everyone said, oh my gosh, social media is great. Look at that. Actually, it's bringing in new customers and everything. Then the social media intern left.
Ooh.
and that kind of a personality you can't make up.
Yeah, no.
Snarky or sense of humor. Let's define sense of humor. What do we mean by that? How are we going to replace that?
Yeah.
And so they got confused in terms of the metrics. And when it comes to leading that voice, I have the same kind of quibble around agencies doing social media posts on behalf of a personality, which ultimately means it's kind of removed from the person.
Yeah.
In that case. And so how does that become credible? How is that an authentic way to render personal and engaging, connecting for a brand?
Yeah. It's such an insightful question, because I think, and not to knock any agency or person who's in social, but I think that's what happens a lot of time, right? The brand's like, we don't know what we're doing. We know we have to have a presence. Just go out there and make it happen, right? And unfortunately, just like your example, what happens is that person doesn't know the tone and the voice of the brand. They're becoming the tone and the voice of the brand. And the brand is going to then adopt this person's tone and voice? No. So for us, it's really about understanding and we go through a lot of exercises with the brands on what their tone and voice is and how to convey that through language, basically typing. Do you use exclamation points? Do you use emoji? What is your tone? If you could pick it, 3 descriptive words, what would it be? Professional, but playful, but a little bit sassy. Okay, we can play with that, right? But we would never just come up with content without that tone and voice information and exercises, because ultimately, if they do leave us, or they go in-house, or whatever the situation is, they need to be able to continue forward. My job is not to, find clients who want me to be there forever. It's to help them, fill the gap in a strategy and tactic area that can be very difficult for brands to meet. And if we can provide them with all of this crazy good information that is tied to their tone and voice and is tied to their values, then if we go away, they should be able to carry that on very easily.
Jumbling my questions here, because I wanted to get into the disclosures, the emotional disclosures of brands, but you said 95% of our decisions are made through emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Yet there are presumably a large number of questions like, what's the price for this object?
Mm-hmm.
$2.99. Fact.
Yeah. Fact.
And so when you look at those type of questions, you're not going to inject emotion into the answer, or do you? Do you suggest, according to your tone, oh, it's $2.99 with an emoji, or how do you deal with that, which looks like a purely factual element? Are you trying to inject emotion even there?
Yes. Yeah, we do. For the brands, obviously, who allow us to do that. We work with a a brand that does a lot of like craft. They manufacture crafting supplies, right? So crafters are using their products. And so if a crafter comes along and says like, hey, how much is your label maker? And we'll say, it's $29.99. And and have you seen this guide on all the cool things you can do with the label maker? Or we'll say something like, what are you planning on doing with it? Because we have a lot of tips we could provide for you, with like a little winky face or something, if we're allowed to do that. And if we are allowed to do that, ultimately the response is better, because what happens if we ask that question? We usually get a response, and then we can respond back and say, oh my gosh, you're organizing your kitchen. Oh, here's our post on like how to organize the kitchen with your label maker, just like Marie, what's her name? Marie anyways, the organizer, I can't think of her name right now. And people love that, right? Then they've got this feeling that we're like not only friendly and helpful, right? So there's two tones of voice right there, helpful, friendly, but they know that they feel safe in the environment of social to come back to us if they have a question or a problem, right? We're presenting ourselves as a safe place to go. And unfortunately, like some of the bad examples I shared in the book, social is not a safe place to go for a lot of brands' customers. And that's why I think a lot of brands are going to do poorly, if not now, soon, because they're not providing that place for people to go. And again, these younger generations use social more and more to research and shop and ask questions.
Well, this feels like a paradox, because if you are suggesting to a brand to share emotions and feelings, that is putting yourself out there, as opposed to cliches and facts.
Yes.
And putting yourself out there will invites risky business.
Yes.
Where you're going to say, hey, listen, this is my political stance. I'm against a certain stance or whatever, abortion. Then so that's my feeling. Well, that can have a whiplash, for the people who are against that.
Yeah.
And so safe, but difficult.
Yes. Well, here's my point to that. Dissolution, like the dissolution of that relationship because they don't agree with your value, or they don't, that you support women's rights and they do not. That is not a bad thing. You are only removing the people who are not going to be long-term loyal customers when you present the value of, hey, we support women's rights, period. The people who come through and say like, oh my gosh, how could you be like this? Blah, blah, blah. They're not your long-term customer. They're not sharing the values that you share. And so dissolution and pushing the wrong people away while bringing the right people closer is not a bad thing, even though brands would see it that way. But follower count is a vanity metric. Who cares if they don't follow you, if they're not going to buy?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's sort of an influencer with 1 million followers who is happy to retweet because he finds she finds your sense of humor funny.
Yeah.
This goes back to this point of the employer, or the employee rather, because we've gotten into a situation for a lot of legacy companies who have employees. They now have to have an opinion, but they didn't have that opinion or that value stated and claimed as a recruitment device or policy at the beginning. So now we're coming into this, and this is our stance on this hot issue. Well, you have to evaluate how the employees are.
Yes.
You have to make a stance, but there are going to be employees who might not be on the same page.
1,000%.
You're coming in late in the game. And I think that is also one of the reasons why so many brands struggle to have, quote unquote, an opinion or feeling, because they've existed before. They might not have shown anything previously. And, CEOs turning the rotation of employees means that they really never had a stable idea on this thing. They were just trying to get the product out and selling it.
Yeah, no, that happens. We had a client where they were getting pushed from a lot of their employees to support Pride publicly as a company. And while they wanted to support Pride and they had no reason not to, they really already had those core values in place. And unfortunately, it didn't include Pride. So what they did was they formed some internal committees and support groups and activities for those who wanted to support Pride within the company. But they still decided that, look, because this doesn't tie to a core value of ours that is going to be public, we won't be supporting it publicly. And I think that makes sense. I mean, you can't, if you're a large brand and you have thousands and thousands and thousands of employees, ultimately your employees would want you to support every single thing they support. And that's not possible for a brand. So you have to know and stick to whatever those core values are. Make sure you document it, disseminate it, right? Make sure it becomes a part of that internal communication with your employees. But then also you can do things that boost EX or employee experience, like forming that internal committee to have Pride events and support Pride within the company without necessarily having to go onto social or other platforms to lift that community up.
Well, I like that point, how you insist on, you can't support everything, because I think this is the nature of strategy. I couldn't help but laugh at the comment you made about Kerastars, where I worked before, but in the time that's limited to us, yeah, no, very good. You do need to be responsive. A couple of comments for you, and I just react. One of them is FAQ. The problem with FAQ that I've seen is that the F doesn't usually stand up. So whenever I go on an FAQ, it's not actually my question is never there, and I can remember absolutely writing questions and answers to the questions we wanted them to ask us.
Yes.
And hiding away from actual questions.
Yes.
How does one, there's an element of data sorting and understanding what actually are the true questions, and, like the hug your haters, and
yes,
within that true insights. How much of that, how do you deal with the FAQ story like that?
Oh my gosh, that is a huge, huge, huge part of what we do. So typically when we onboard a customer care client, they give us their FAQs that they have. And what we find very quickly, to your point, is that we might get a few questions that fit into that box that they've already created, but most of them do not. And that's why we start that FAQ repository of, all of the comments and questions that we get. So we use a lot of tagging and labeling of the conversations that are happening on social. And we also use social listening, because what a lot of brands are missing the boat on is people, you and I are on social. We've both bought Kerastars and we're having a conversation about them, but we're not actually tagging them. Right. So if we're not tagging them, that information and that data, this conversation that we're having about how they don't respond, or we didn't like this product, or whatever it is, isn't coming to light for them, and therefore can't be added to the FAQ documentation, and therefore leaves them hanging or leaves them short in some way. So we use social listening, we use tagging, and ultimately that little box of an FAQ becomes not even a box. There are no walls. There is no spoon, as they say in the Matrix, right? It's constantly being iterated and updated based on that triage of red goes internal. We get the answer back. It becomes green. We get a lot of what we call yellows, which is where it's not like oh my gosh, somebody needs to handle this person's complaint right now, but it's like a weird question, kind of like your ingredient question. That might have been a yellow, right? Because you're not saying I'm mad or I'm angry. You're just curious, like, what is this? And we didn't have it in the FAQ document. So it's not a green. Yellows always turn into greens because we end up getting that information, right? The more greens we can answer, the faster we get with that first contact resolution, which is huge, because that's where you win. As Jay would say, that's where you win on time to win, right? Because you're responding quickly. And especially when it's acquisition questions, like people who want to buy from you and they're asking those research questions on social, if you're the first person to answer it with not only the answer, but some other helpful information or a promo link or whatever it is, you're going to 9 times out of 10 be the brand that they buy from.
Yeah, I do like that way you expressed the difference between acquisition and retention. That was I felt one of the strong ahas for me in your book, Brooke. This idea of tagging everything, and in particular sorting between retention and acquisition.
Yes. Yes. I will say right now, like, this is, I am not one to gatekeep information. If you could just start tagging all of the conversations that you get on your social channels, either retention or acquisition. So that means if somebody's coming to you post-purchase with a complaint or a question, retention. We're trying to retain this customer. If somebody's coming to you and they're saying, hey, is your printer Alexa compatible? That's an acquisition question. Tag it as such. Because if you can show the C-suite how much acquisition is coming through your social channels, you can start to prove the value of social to the C-suite, because a lot of people in those roles still don't understand the value of social.
Last question, Brooke, and it's something I talked to you about before we hit the record button, because it kind of irked me somehow, where you put intimate before personal in the social penetration theory, so-called. You had so there's superficial, intimate, personal, then core, as I saw it. And I was just bemused that intimate should be considered a more superficial component than personal. I mean, for me, personal, the most intimate things are much more hidden and confidential than just personal information. If I make an example, I'm married to a woman. Right, that's a personal thing. It's nothing to do with my professional element or superficial. I'm married to a woman, and it's a great woman, 28 years. That's not intimate. That's just personal. Right. But intimate would be telling you something more important about health, or about troubles, or feelings and opinions about it.
Yes. No, I don't disagree. That is how it was presented in the theory. So I tried to stay true to the science, the psychology, sociology, whatever you want to call it. I tried to stay true to what they said. I don't necessarily agree with that either. I think it should be flipped. But ultimately, I think what we're trying to say is, how can you invoke feelings? And we also said, like, what's the difference between feelings and emotions? Emotions are sensations in your body, right? It's your chemical reaction to how you're feeling. Feelings are actually generated from our thoughts about those emotions. So when I say solicit feelings, you're making someone think about something to then have an emotion in their body, or a sensation of joy or anger or whatever it may be. Does that make sense?
So it's almost like the feeling is the label of the emotion. Somehow.
Yeah, and the emotion's a sensation. Like how you feel when you're happy may be different than how I feel when I'm happy. And we know people have different types of anger and different types of sadness. But yeah, the feeling is the label for the emotion.
Lovely. Well, Brooke, we have come to the conclusion of this little chat. Lovely chat. Conversations that connect. How can people connect with you, get your book, and any other links you'd like to share with us?
Absolutely. So you can find me on LinkedIn these days. That's where I'm hanging out the most. Unfortunately, Twitter used to be my favorite platform, but it's a bit of a dumpster fire right now. So I'm hanging out mostly on LinkedIn. You can look for Brooke Sellas, Brooke, last name Sellas. And the book can be found on Amazon, Conversations That Connect, or just go to bsquared.media. And we've got actually chapter 1 for free there if you want to try before you buy.
Nice. Hey, Brooke, thank you so much. Great to have you on. Say hi to Ken, and be in touch.
Thank you.